In many of the Hongaku Sanghas throughout the United States and elsewhere, we've been talking for the past few weeks, perhaps 2 months, about the 7 latent tendencies, the 10 fetters, and the 5 hindrances. And they refer to three distinct things happening in a psychological process that manifests in our day-to-day lives and creates karma. Let's start with the 7 Anusaya, the latent tendencies. The first latent tendency is one we are all going to know. It's the latent tendency to senses, and that comes with our greed. It's kamaraga samyojana, and we see that every day. We crave particular activities. We crave to be around certain people. We like to think about certain things. As we grow older, these things change. We might start off as children thinking about our superheroes or our parents or somebody at school. As we get older, it changes to sports activity or some sort of artistic endeavor. We get older and it turns to sex, and for most of us, there's a tendency to grow out of that eventually, but for many there isn't. So as we get older, our greediness, the objects of our greed, tend to change. And so this is very noticeable. Our next tendency is that to aversion. Well, if you like something, you automatically dislike something else. And this is the basis, or the basic screwed upness of our lives. When we are trying to cling to something, it's because we're trying to push something else away. We want what we don't have. We do want what we do not have. For instance, if we're unhappy, we want happiness. If we're in pain, we want pleasure. If we're hungry, we want to be satiated. If we're thirsty, we want to drink. If we feel like we are not special, we try to become special. If we feel inferior, we want to be superior, or at least equal. So these are things that come to us daily. They're subconscious. They happen all the time. The latent tendency for speculative opinion is also very common and very clear. Speculative opinion, like, is there a God? Is there not a God? Is the current president of the United States a good guy or a bad guy? And then we formulate opinions around them. And whatever opinion we're going to have, we're also going to try to support it. This too is unconscious. If we believe that the President of the United States is an unpleasant person, we will look for evidence to support that opinion. And if he does anything nice, well, we'll just ignore that and go on to the next tendency. And this is the latent tendency to skeptical doubt. This is a scary one, because a lot of my friends in Buddhism, particularly in Zen Buddhism, have the feeling that the Buddha said doubt everything. Well, the Buddha did not say doubt everything. What they're, of course, referring to is the Sutta to the Kalamas. And what he did say at that point was to the effect of, take things with a grain of salt. Don't believe something just because somebody said it, somebody important said it, somebody you like said it, somebody in authority said it, or because you read it in a book. Believe it because you've experienced it, or it fits within your context of reason. It's not a blatant doubt everything. It's a a little bit of skepticism, a little bit of a grain of salt. Okay, it may or may not be true what this person is saying, but when we say doubt everything, what we're automatically implying is disbelief, a proactive form of disbelief. I ain't believing nothing until it's proven to me. And this is not what the Buddha was talking about. Because in the Sutta to the Kalamas, if you notice, he says, don't believe it just because, and he goes down this list of just becauses, and then he gives a teaching which we are expected to believe. The next one, the latent tendency to conceit and pride, and this is called mana in Pali and Sanskrit, and that's where we get the word for man, woman, human being. This is an interesting one because what the latent tendency conceit does is cause us to put people on pedestals, causes us to put ourselves on pedestals. So what we're automatically actually saying is, you are better than me, or I am better than you, or we are the same as each other. And all three are blatant lies. All people are not created equals. All people are equally different. That's the only equality that we actually have. Every one of us is a different person. Every one of us is unique. We are a unique manifestation of the universe, and that's the way that is. The latent tendency for craving continued existence, Bhava Raga. This is why we believe in heavens and hells. This is why we want to become something other than what we are. The latent tendency to craving for continued existence speculates about life after death. It speculates about other dimensions and worlds of which we have no experience. Is there life after death? I don't know. I'll let you know when I get there. The latent tendency to ignorance. This one doesn't go away easily. Ignorance is not blatant stupidity. If it were, things would be easy. We could correct stupidity. We cannot correct ignorance because we don't know if we're being ignorant. A lot of times we're absolutely in the dark about things and we don't know. We think we see clearly. So this is a tough one to overcome. Do we actually need to overcome these 7 tendencies? Well, actually, we're not going to. They're not going to be overcome. They have to be contended with. All of our actions, whether they're mental, verbal, or physical, are not always conscious. We have a habit mind. It sort of fends for itself. The unawakened person is likely to act so habitually that he is unconscious of his actions. He's sort of working on autopilot. At one point, the Buddha is talking about ordinary people, and he does make a statement that sounds an awful lot like he's referring to people as the walking dead. And yeah, we are all zombies in a lot of respects. We habitually do things. We ritually do things. We don't know why. There are times in our lives when we let whole days, not just minutes or hours, but entire days, even months, just fade away. We don't know what we did because we were just acting out habitually. It's called habit mind in Japan, and it's probably the greatest factor for our being unhappy because we're acting out blindly. These actions are still said to be deliberate, that is, karmically potent, they're considered deliberate because we're not dealing with them. We're not investigating them. We're not looking at them. We're not doing things that allow us to make for changes. These bear karmic fruits. So even if I am unconsciously doing something like exaggerating about myself or putting myself down, it can go either way. That is creating a karma that will manifest either in the immediate future, the near future, the distant future, or even in another lifetime, they tell me. It's rooted in greed, hate, or delusion. All these habits are. I want, I don't want, and I really don't know what it is that I want and don't want, because I've never investigated that either. When I was younger, I was always looking for the perfect girl. Well, one day I thought I found the perfect girl and discovered that I wasn't the perfect guy. Then I found the perfect girl in somebody else. Well, a few weeks into the relationship, I realized she wasn't all that perfect. And then finally I did find the perfect girl, and it's because we're perfect for each other a lot of the time. And that's the only perfection we've got. Things change. When you say hello, you've already built in a goodbye. When you buy a cup of coffee, you've already gotten stuck with trash. The Anusayas, the latent tendencies, happen on a pre-conscious level. They act out below the consciousness, and they are habits of mind, habits of thinking, habits of seeing, habits of having mental experiences. We don't put much thought, if any, into them because we're not cognizant of them. We're not paying attention to them. Deliberately done, but not with wise attention. Yoniso manasikara. The Theravadins of the lineage of Ajahn Lee Damadero pay a lot of attention to that word, that term, Yoniso manasikara, because that is the way to go through life if you want to be happy. You have to pay attention and do it wisely. On this level, this habit mind is called a formation, a sanskara. It's karmically significant, and it's done through mind, speech, or the body, or all three at the same time. They're very flexible. They are karmically significant because we act out of that on them, at least on one of these three levels: mind, speech, or body. We feed the latent tendencies because once we have experienced them, if we feel that we have had a successful experience, we try to reinforce it. If I have the first latent tendency of greed to sensual pleasures, then I will continually seek sensual pleasures and justify them to myself. If I have the latent tendency toward aversion, I will be averse to things, reasonably or unreasonably, and try to justify those aversions. He lied to me, he beat me, he cheated me. If I keep reinforcing that, I will continually look for evidence, and that evidence will reinforce what I'm already planning to reinforce. It's a catch-22 vicious cycle sort of a thing, and most of us do this habitually and unconsciously. This is why we have so much hatred in the world, so much violence, so much sectarian BS, even within Buddhism. Buddhism is not as homogeneous as people would like to believe. But it's because we feed these latent tendencies. They're with us forever. They do not go away. They are the primordial roots of our motivation. We don't act without them. They dictate and they color all of our actions, whether those actions are verbal, mental, or physical. Now, about 6th century, 7th century, Common Era, a fellow named Buddhaghosa wrote a wonderful thing called The Path of Purification, the Visuddhimagga. The translations that we have of it today are incredibly boring, and it's a pretty boring book. It's very long. But he deals extensively with the latent tendencies. And he says that they're called latent tendencies because of their persistence. They exist forever, life after life after life, and they're the conditions for arising of a new and renewed greed, lust, and ignorance. Now, the 10 fetters deal mainly with our continued birth and rebirth within the samsaric process. Samsara is a process, it's not a place. It's the belief, the first fetter is a belief in a permanent personality, an ego. And it's the belief that the ego that I create is not a fabrication, but it's actually real. I am who I think I am. Here's a little experiment for you. Sometime today, take 5 or 10 minutes and just repeat your name over and over and over again and see what thoughts come to mind. Have you ever met somebody and the first thing they said to you is like, "Hi, I'm Bob. I'm a lawyer." Or, "I'm Sharon. I'm a CEO." We always tend to identify with our job, our position in life, what it is we want to be when we grow up. We're constantly identifying with things which are not us, and these things that we identify account for a great deal of our personality. And they're not real. They are not ours, and we are not theirs. They are simply conditions within our life. Now, out of these perceived conditions, we create our ego in response to the conditions we believe we are living in. And 9/10 out of the time, we're not even living in the conditions we imagine. Think about this. Out of every 400,000 bits of information coming into us every second, and there are probably more bits of information than that, we are only cognizant, aware of 2,000 bits of information. That's 0.5%. If we're only aware of 0.5% of our environment at any given time, what's the other 99.5%? We call that fantasy. The next fetter is, wow, there it is again, doubt, extreme skepticism. Vichikichi, I love this word. Vichikichia. Wow, say that 3 times on tequila. Extreme doubt is a destroyer of any potential that we have. That means when we experience extreme doubt, what we tend to do is lock ourselves into a box because we are locking potential opportunity out of the box. If I doubt everything, then I believe in nothing. If I believe in nothing, there is no motivation to excel, to change, to become happy. Because if someone says happiness in my life is possible, and I have extreme skepticism, I'm going to say, oh no, it's not. Well, what's the alternative? Extreme misery? Think about that for just a moment. The third fetter is also interesting, and that is attachment to rites, rituals, and ceremonies. This is not talking about the rituals that we do when we do meditation, or the rituals we do when we chant, or the rituals we do when we're in a service of some kind. Rites, rituals, and ceremonies, one, deal with sectarianism. Even in the lifetime of the Buddha, there was already the tendency toward the splitting up of the Sangha into different schools of thought, into different interpretations. But it's also the idea that the rites and rituals of these particular sects and schools of Buddhism or Christianity or Islam or any other religion have some sort of magical efficacy. It's like saying, if I pray hard enough to such and such a god and do the appropriate number of recitations and get a dead chicken, put it in a paper bag and swing it around my head 3 times while dancing on one foot and say this mantra, I'm going to become rich. It doesn't work that way. This is another inhibitor. The rites, rituals, and ceremonies condition the mind, so when used properly, reasonably, they can be of great benefit, but they, in and of themselves, have no power whatsoever. You can recite 100,000 mantras. The mantra isn't doing anything except giving you an object of concentration. And this is what is meant by this particular fetter. Now, these 3 fetters, the belief in a permanent ego or self-view, extreme doubt and skepticism, and attachments to rites, rituals, and ceremonies, are the first things you have to get rid of and deal with just to get on the path to awakenedness. If you have any one of these 3 fetters still being clung to by your mind, you haven't even begun on the path yet. You're still sort of mulling it over. And even if you have accepted these 3 as conditions as fetters, if you've done so only intellectually, then you haven't made much progress at all, have you? You have to bring these into practice. Then we can work on things like attachment to sense desire, which happen to be the first Anusaya. This is why we're doing stuff. We're attached to sense desire. But that's not nearly as an important or inhibiting fetter as the belief in a permanent personality, skepticism, or attachment to rites, rituals, and ceremonies. Look at it this way. I can be attached to the sense pleasure of going to work every day and looking at a particular person that is working there, and I say to myself, oh, my goodness, that's a lovely person. Now, if I do that, that's not too bad. But if I tell myself, if only I were married to that person, I'd be happy, then I'm back on the first fetter, belief in a permanent personality. Because I'm believing that something outside of me will make me happy because I'm incapable of making myself happy. Why is that? Why am I incapable? Because I cannot change. If I have a permanent personality, then it cannot change. Why? It's permanent. The next one we'll all identify with, and that's ill will, anger. Anger turns into hatred, ill will, the seeking of revenge. This is a really hard one for us to give up, particularly in the West, where we're taught anger is a virtue. We're taught that ill will, wanting our enemies to fail, as a matter of fact, having enemies, because they hate our freedom or some such nonsense, is a good thing. We're taught that in Christianity, we're taught that in Judaism, we're taught that in Islam, we're taught that in our schools, we see it in the movies, we hear it in music, we hear it all over the place. It is normal to hate other human beings. Is it natural? Not only no, but hell no, it's not natural to hate another being. You might be wary of them, you might be suspicious, but hatred is totally unnatural. In Buddhism, we refer to anger as a disease. In the West, we even talk about righteous anger, like righteous disease. So if anger as a disease can be righteous, then so can herpes, chlamydia, and lung cancer. It doesn't work. This is something that keeps us tied to rebirth in the samsaric process. And then we have the craving for existence in the form realm. We want to die and go to heaven. Well, screw dying, I just want to go to heaven, right? We want to go to paradise. We want a better life for ourselves, if not now, at least in the afterlife. We want to physically transform ourselves into a being of glory, living in heaven with all the other saints and good people. Well, Buddhism doesn't really teach much about reincarnation. We have a different process called rebirth, which is basically a change of mind. It does not affect, it does not include change of spatio-temporal material. Reincarnation, on the other hand, exists in almost every other religion. If you die and you physically find yourself in heaven or hell after death, that is called reincarnation. Well, we don't quite teach that, but that's a subject for another video. Craving for existence in the formless worlds. The formless worlds are a little bit different. They're a heavenly realm, but you're more like I don't know, in Star Trek, where beings are composed of nothing but energy. Somehow we evolve beyond materiality. And there's a craving for that sort of freedom and liberty. We already have that freedom, we just don't know it. And then here's it is again, conceit. Mana, I'm better than, I'm worse than, I'm equal to. Conceit. It's not always about a hyperinflated ego, although I can't think of anybody more egotistical than one who says, nobody loves me, how terrible I must be, oh woe is me, I'm such a horrible human being that nobody can stand to be around. That's pretty narcissistic, I think. Restlessness. Well, this is our own fault. Restlessness, of course, comes from boredom. That's something that nobody can help you with. You have to do that yourself. If you're bored, it's your own fault. Ignorance, the last one, avijja. It seems to be predominant. It exists everywhere. It's totally pervasive. We're always in the dark. Now, the hindrances have to do with meditation and actually chanting, because that is a form of meditation. And the hindrances on these would be sense desire. We're back to that one that seems to be everywhere. Anger, can't have any kind of spiritual or self-actualizing growth without some peace of mind, and anger is going to destroy it. The interesting thing about anger is that it's always based on fear. You do not become angry unless you're afraid of losing something, even if that's only the opportunity to have something else. Anger always involves a fear of loss. Check it out, investigate it for yourself, and see if this is not true. Sloth and torpor. Laziness and agitation, basically. And every one of us has that restlessness whenever we're bored. We want to be stimulated. We want to be excited. And then agitation and worry. Who doesn't worry, especially in tough economic times and very weird political times? And extreme skepticism, once again. If the Buddha really wanted us to doubt everything, would he call skepticism a fetter, a hindrance, and a latent tendency that will become a obsession? This is all stuff that conditions us. It leads to our conditioning of the world, the latent tendencies, the 10 fetters, the 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances condition our ability to meditate. The 10 fetters condition how we are going to interact consciously with ourselves and with others in society. The Anusaya, the latent tendencies, will condition the way we behave subconsciously. This conditioning leads us to create fabrications, that is, conventional reality as we understand it. It leads us to measure things, to compare things, to see if these things meet our criteria for goodness or badness. A fountain pen is not a fountain pen unless it meets the criteria of a fountain pen. And we are doing this constantly throughout our lives. We are mentally measuring, and because things meet criteria or don't meet criteria, we then label them. And then we add moralistic qualities to it, like goodness and badness. This is moralizing. This isn't reality. Nothing is good. Nothing is bad. What do we mean by good anyway? Good just means that it pleases us. Bad just means that it displeases us. And if it displeases us enough, we call it evil. And this creates our conventional reality, relative experience, or conditional reality. The Buddha actually refers to it as false reality. With conditional existence, we have happiness and unhappiness, love and hate, satisfaction and dissatisfaction, acceptance and bigotry, success and failure. Well, you can read just as I can, and etc. and non-etc. In unconditional existence, we have the same thing, but it's not as important. We don't experience the negative, the toxic sensations that come with happiness and unhappiness. We don't crave the happiness, the love, the satisfaction, the acceptance, the success, the passion, the likes, the comfort of being wherever it is that we want to be. Because in an unconditionally aware mind, it's aware that all the beauty of life is around us already. It is aware that my happiness comes from within me, not from the conditions of my environment. So unconditional existence leads to contentment by nullifying the importance of unhappiness, of hate, of satisfaction, dissatisfaction, acceptance and failure, passions and apathy, likes and dislikes, comforts and discomforts, the etceteras, and the non-etceteras. Because they no longer become significant factors in our happiness. Because we're not placing criteria that has to be met and imposing that criteria on nature. One who is living in an unconditional existence is called an arahat, or a highly realized bodhisattva. They are naturally content in their surroundings because they are naturally content with themselves. I once made a comment to a student of mine that if you were truly happy with yourself, you could live comfortably and happily in a cabin in the woods in southern Indiana. Well, he certainly thought that would have been a bad idea. He'd rather live in a condo in downtown Chicago. But that's because he was clinging to his personality and his views on what makes and what does not make a happy life. If we stop putting that criteria on happiness as a condition of life, then happiness becomes readily available. We're not splitting ourselves off from it. So what is it that we do, or we ought to do in the moment? Do nothing. Do absolutely nothing in this moment. If you have negative emotions, or you experience the fetters or the hindrances, do nothing. Yes, you do nothing. You don't run, you don't hide, don't deny, don't self-medicate, don't go talk to your mother about it, and don't seek psychological help. Not in that moment. You may need it, but you don't need it then and there. What is it you do need? You need to allow yourself the experience to unfold before you. You need to be able to see what is happening and see it clearly without imposing judgment on it, without imposing criteria, without measuring it, without qualifying it. Whatever experience that you are having, experience it in this moment fully and completely. And while you're experiencing it, very, very carefully observe it. See what it's doing. Allow yourself to have the experience and allow yourself the observation. And this is how we go through life in a more happy way, unfettered, unencumbered by hindrances, unencumbered by our own ego. And this is where Jodo Shinshu in particular talks about self-power and other power. It is myself that creates the hindrances. It is myself that fetters me, binds me to the cycle and process of samsara. It is other power that allows me the pleasure of existence in its totality. Namo Amitabha Buddha, y'all.